Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a close look at, well, the fundamental boundary of all life, the cellular plasma membrane. And we're not talking about some passive bag holding everything in. You should think of the cell membrane less like a wall and more like a hyper-intelligent dynamic gatekeeper.
That's a great way to put it. It really is the edge of life, and its intelligence is just astonishing.
Right.
I mean, if you think about something as complex as thought, it all comes down to the membrane's function. Brain cells communicate with these tiny packages called vesicles.
Okay.
These vesicles fuse with the membrane of one cell, they release signaling molecules, and those molecules travel to bind to specific receptor proteins on the next cell's membrane.
And that binding is what sends the message inside.
Exactly. That constant, regulated two-way traffic. That's the membrane's whole purpose.
So our mission today is to unpack this incredible machine. We're going to start with the physical structure, what's called the fluid mosaic model, and then get into how that structure makes the membrane selectively permeable.
And then we'll hit the three main strategies for traffic management: passive, active, and bulk transport.
Let's jump right into the nuts and bolts. What's it made of?
The basic ingredients are lipids, mostly phospholipids, proteins, and then a few carbohydrates. But the entire architecture, it really rests on the phospholipid. That molecule is the key because it's amphipathic.
Amphipathic. That sounds complicated.
It does, but it just means it has a kind of dual personality.
Okay.
One end, the head, is hydrophilic. It loves water. But the other end, the tails, are hydrophobic. They fear water.
So when you put them in water, which is what the inside and outside of a cell is, they just arrange themselves.
They spontaneously arrange themselves into a perfect phospholipid bilayer. It's this beautiful, stable boundary because the water-fearing tails all get sheltered together on the inside, away from the water.
And the water-loving heads face out on both sides. It's really elegant.
It is, and this structure is the basis of the fluid mosaic model. So the model just says the membrane is a fluid bilayer of lipids with this mosaic of proteins kind of bobbing around in it.
The word fluid there is really important. How much movement are we actually talking about?
A phenomenal amount. A single phospholipid can move sideways, swapping places with its neighbor, about 10 million times per second.
10 million per second.
Yeah. It's so fast that one phospholipid could travel the entire length of a bacterial cell in just 1 second.
But wait, if the phospholipids are moving that fast, why don't the proteins just zip right out of the membrane? You mentioned they move much slower.
That's a crucial point. While the lipid environment is very fluid, a lot of those membrane proteins are actually anchored. They're tethered to the cytoskeleton inside the cell or the extracellular matrix outside.
So they're held in place.
Right. That anchoring stops them from drifting too far. But we know for a fact that they can move.
And we know this because of a really classic experiment, right? The Fry and Edidin experiment.
A fantastic piece of science. They took mouse cells and human cells and labeled their membrane proteins with different fluorescent dyes. One color for mouse, one for human. Then they fused the two cells together.
So they made this hybrid cell, which started out with, like, a mouse half and a human half.
Exactly. And what they saw was that after just an hour, the two sets of proteins were completely mixed, totally intermingled across the whole surface.
That's definitive proof. They had to be moving sideways in that fluid bilayer.
Irrefutable evidence.
Okay, so the fluidity is a given, but cells have to regulate it. This brings us to temperature. What makes the membrane thick, like butter, or thin, like oil?
It's all in the fatty acid tails. If the tails are unsaturated, they have kinks in them, and those kinks prevent the phospholipids from packing tightly together.
Which makes the membrane more fluid, more oily.
Right, and if the tails are saturated, they're straight, so they pack together tightly, making the membrane more viscous, more like butter.
And this is where cholesterol steps in, for animal cells at least. It's a kind of fluidity buffer.
That's the perfect term for it. At high temperatures, like our body temperature, cholesterol actually restrains the phospholipids, making the membrane less fluid, stopping it from getting too flimsy. But at low temperatures, it does the opposite. It gets in the way, preventing them from packing too tightly, which lowers the temperature at which the membrane would solidify.
So it resists changes at both extremes. That's some serious evolutionary engineering.
Oh, absolutely. You see it in nature all the time. Cold water fish have way more unsaturated tails in their membranes. Winter wheat actually increases its unsaturated phospholipids in the fall to stop its membranes from freezing solid.
Life is just constantly fine-tuning its own walls. So lipids provide the fluid structure, but the proteins are the workers. You mentioned two main types.
We did. You have integral proteins, which actually penetrate into that hydrophobic core. Most of them are transmembrane proteins, meaning they span the entire membrane.
And then there are the other ones.
Peripheral proteins. They're more loosely bound to the surface, often attached to the integral proteins.
And these proteins have jobs to do. This isn't just a barrier, it's where the action is.
Yeah.
Let's run through the 6 major functions.
First up, transport. Simple enough, they move things across. Some are channels, like a tunnel, and others are carriers that change shape to shuttle a substance.
Chicken.
Enzymatic activity. Proteins can be enzymes with their active sites exposed to carry out metabolic reactions. Sometimes you'll find a whole team of them organized right there in the membrane.
Okay, third is signal transduction. This is how the cell listens, right?
Exactly. A receptor protein binds to a signaling molecule, like a hormone, and that binding changes the protein's shape, which relays a message to the inside of the cell.
Fourth, cell recognition. This sounds important.
It's huge. These proteins have carbohydrate chains attached, making them glycoproteins, and they act like ID tags. It's how your cells sort into tissues or how your immune system knows what's you and what's foreign.
Right, like with blood types or organ transplants.
Precisely. Fifth is intercellular joining, just proteins hooking cells together to form tissues.
And finally, number 6.
Attachment to the cytoskeleton and the extracellular matrix. This gives the cell its shape and helps coordinate what's happening inside with what's happening outside.
And all that sidedness, the fact that the ID tags and receptors are always facing out, that's all set up during manufacturing in the ER and Golgi.
Yes, the asymmetry is built in from the start.
Okay, that brings us to the core concept, selective permeability. The membrane is a gatekeeper, not just a sieve.
Exactly. Some things get through easily, others don't. Small, nonpolar molecules, think oxygen, carbon dioxide, they can just dissolve in the lipid part and zip right through.
But anything with a charge or anything polar, like an ion or a glucose molecule,
They hit that hydrophobic core and are stopped in their tracks. They need help from a transport protein.
and these proteins are incredibly specific.
Breathtakingly so. A glucose carrier protein will move glucose across 50,000 times faster than it could on its own, but it will reject fructose, its own structural isomer. It's a lock and key system.
So once the gate is open for a molecule,
Okay.
how does it actually move? This is where we get into passive transport.
Passive transport is the free ride. It takes zero energy from the cell
Why not?
because it's driven by diffusion. That's just the natural tendency of things to move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. The gradient itself is a form of potential energy.
And the most important example of this is osmosis.
Osmosis is just the diffusion of free water across a membrane. Water will always move from an area with a lot of free water, which means low solute concentration, to an area with less free water, or high solute concentration. It's trying to dilute the more concentrated side.
And the effect of that water movement is all about tonicity. And this is critical for animal cells which don't have a cell wall.
It is. If you put an animal cell in an isotonic solution, the water concentration is balanced so there's no net movement. The cell is stable and happy.
But in a hypertonic solution, like very salty water,
The cell will lose water to the saltier environment, shrivel up, and die.
and the opposite, a hypotonic solution, like pure water.
Water rushes into the cell, which is saltier inside. The cell swells up and can actually burst, or lyse. It's why creatures that live in fresh water, like a paramecium, have to constantly pump water out to survive.
But for a plant cell, with its rigid wall, a hypotonic environment is actually a good thing, isn't it?
It's the ideal state. Water rushes in, but the cell wall pushes back. That's called turgor pressure, and it makes the cell firm or turgid. It's what keeps plants standing upright.
And if a plant is in an isotonic solution, it goes limp.
It becomes flaccid. And in a hypertonic solution, it's even worse. The cell loses water and the membrane pulls away from the wall, that's plasmolysis, and it kills the plant.
So passive transport is always down the concentration gradient. And when a protein helps with that, it's called facilitated diffusion.
Exactly. The protein just facilitates or speeds up the downhill ride. You have channel proteins, like the amazing aquaporins that let billions of water molecules through per second.
All right.
And you have carrier proteins, which physically change shape to carry the solute across, like that glucose transporter we talked about.
Perfect. So that's the free ride. Now for the hard work, active transport.
This is the uphill paddle. Active transport moves things against their concentration gradient from low concentration to high, and this requires energy, usually from ATP.
And this only uses carrier proteins, which we call pumps.
Right, and the most famous one in animal cells is the sodium-potassium pump.
This thing is a huge energy hog, right?
It's massive. This one pump uses about a third of a typical animal cell's entire energy supply.
A third. A third of our food energy is just for this one tiny pump in every cell.
That's right, because maintaining that gradient high potassium inside, low sodium inside, is critical for your nerves and muscles to work.
How does it work exactly?
It's a cycle. 3 sodium ions bind inside. ATP gives it a phosphate, changing its shape. It opens to the outside and releases the sodium. In that new shape, it binds 2 potassium ions from the outside. That causes the phosphate to pop off. It snaps back to its original shape and releases the potassium inside.
So 3 positive charges go out, but only 2 come in.
And that net transfer of 1 positive charge out of the cell helps create the membrane potential, the voltage across the membrane.
So the inside is negative. It's like a tiny battery.
It is a tiny battery, and that voltage, combined with the concentration gradient, creates what we call the electrochemical gradient. Any pump that creates voltage like this is an electrogenic pump.
And the cell is clever. You can use the energy stored in that gradient to do other work in a process called cotransport.
Exactly. Cotransport is when the downhill diffusion of one substance powers the uphill transport of another. For example, a plant cell pumps protons H plus ions out, creating a steep gradient.
Right.
Then it lets the protons flow back in, and it uses the energy of that flow to drag sucrose into the cell against its concentration gradient.
It's like a water wheel powering a conveyor belt.
A perfect analogy.
Okay, last category. What about really big stuff? Proteins, whole polysaccharides.
For that, you need bulk transport. This uses vesicles.
So this is the shipping and receiving department.
It is. Exocytosis is for shipping things out. A vesicle from inside fuses with the membrane and releases its contents. Think insulin or neurotransmitters.
And that adds new membrane material.
It does. And the reverse is endocytosis. The cell takes things in by pinching off a piece of its own membrane to form a new vesicle.
And there are 3 types of that.
3 main types. First, phagocytosis, which is cellular eating. The cell extends pseudopods to wrap around a large particle, like an amoeba eating another cell.
Okay, eating. What's next?
Penocytosis, cellular drinking. This is nonspecific. The cell just gulps in a tiny droplet of the fluid outside, whatever happens to be in it.
Just taking a sip of its environment. And the third type is the most sophisticated.
That's receptor-mediated endocytosis. This is highly specific. The membrane has receptors for a particular substance. When enough of them bind, that whole patch of membrane pinches inward to form a vesicle.
And that's how our cells take in cholesterol, right? Using LDL receptors.
Exactly. And if those receptors are defective, you get familial hypercholesterolemia because the cholesterol can't get out of the blood and into the cells efficiently.
And these 2 processes, exocytosis and endocytosis, are constantly in balance in a healthy cell.
Right, they have to be to maintain a constant surface area.
It's just a remarkable system. We've got the fluid structure, the protein mosaic doing all the work, and these 3 energy strategies, passive, active, and bulk all, just to manage that border.
It truly is the defining feature of life. That specialized, adaptive, dynamic structure is what allows a cell to be a cell.
And it all relies on maintaining that incredibly precise internal environment. It really makes you think. Considering that the sodium-potassium pump alone uses a third of all your energy, just how reliant is cellular life on a perfect balance? Think about it. How close are you at a cellular level to bursting or shriveling at any given moment? That border is doing all the hard work of just existing.